You need to be able to see that board. All right. So, welcome to section 3. Okay, we are going to talk specifically about Washington's presidency, especially building that presidency. All right. And we are going to talk about that dreaded P word, precedent, that looks like president. So when we're reading the questions, we keep saying, what important president did George Washington create for future presidents? Okay, is this table going to be a problem? We'll see. All right. Is anybody interested in reading today? Okay, great. Take us through the first 2 paragraphs on page 5 under Washington's presidency. Huh? Go for it. I will break this party up.
The first president said, I walk on unfrozen ground. In other words, every action I was taking would be new. It might set a pattern for how to do things in the future. Washington wanted to set the right precedents by closely following the Constitution. Once Washington became president, he had to work with Congress to figure out how to carry out his duties. The Constitution typically did not provide specific instructions on how things should be done. It established three branches of government: legislative, judicial, and executive.
Judicial.
Judicial.
Mm-hmm.
It also mentioned departments of the executive branch, but it did not describe those departments or specify how many there would be.
Okay, so we're getting our definition on that word precedent. Okay, precedent, an example for future actions or decisions. All right, so a precedent is the example that you set right away. Did I talk to you guys yesterday about my dance party?
No.
Okay, cool. So let's say on the first, huh? I talked about the dance party?
Yeah, I remember it.
Yeah, you did.
It's okay, let's review it real quick. Okay. If on the first day of school you guys walked in and I was having a dance party, okay? Black lights, strobes, disco balls everywhere, we're getting down, right? Okay. Would you expect to have a dance party the second day of school?
Yeah.
That's how we started it, right? So when you guys would walk back into my class, you would be thinking like, oh, yesterday was so much fun, like I cannot wait, right? But let's say the second day I was super strict. You weren't allowed to talk. You weren't allowed to blink. You weren't allowed to speak. You couldn't drink anything. Okay. You had to look straight ahead. That's 2 different ways of doing things, right? So that would be very confusing. It would be confusing because the precedent that I started on that first day was that we were going to have fun and have a disco party every single day. Okay. So think about that is when you're doing precedents, it is the examples and the things that you do first that other people might follow as they go through. So if I created that, then what would you guys do? You guys would have a dance party with me, right? We would expect those certain behaviors every single day. So George Washington is now the first president, and he has to figure out how to set up the first things that other presidents may do to follow. So that's what we're looking for. This chapter, we are looking for those precedents, those first things that George Washington does that everybody else is going to follow behind him. Now, one of the things is it talks about our 3 branches of government: the executive branch, the judicial branch, and the legislative branch. Our president is in the executive, Congress is in the legislative, and then Congress has 2 houses, the House of Representatives and the Senate. Then our judicial branch is our judges, judges. It's close. Okay. And okay, that's our Supreme Court. So in our Constitution, it sets up rules. Okay, now I'm not going to be able to show this on live, but I'm going to walk back there and hopefully talk loud enough so that it picks it up. If you guys can direct your attention back here on the wall. Okay, so these three documents you guys should have learned about last year. Okay, the Declaration of Independence, which is basically our big divorce letter to Great Britain saying we don't want to be in a relationship with y'all anymore. Okay, the Constitution is what forms our government. Now I know that you cannot read that, but there are different sections that are on this piece of paper, and in each section it says what somebody is allowed to do, what the executive branch is allowed to do, what the legislative branch, judicial, so on. Okay? And of course, our Bill of Rights are, this is not the original, this is the 12th Bill of Rights, which did not get passed, but there's 10 of these that give you extra rights, which are up there. And we will talk about those later, the amendments, okay? So in the Constitution, okay, it doesn't provide specific things. It does say there's an executive branch, a legislative branch, and a judicial branch. But it also mentions that the executive branch can make departments. But it doesn't say how many. It doesn't say what those departments should do. It doesn't say what those departments should be called. Okay? Scooch in a little bit for me. Okay. So George Washington works with Congress to create 3 departments. All right? These departments are over here. We have the Department of State, which runs foreign affairs. Does anybody know what foreign affairs are? What's the word foreign mean? Very good. Not from this world, right? Okay. Outside of this country, okay? That is a foreign country. If they are from here, do you know what the word for from here is? Local? Yeah, kind of. It's a broader word. Yes.
Native.
Huh?
Native, isn't it?
Okay, kind of. You guys are getting close. You're saying different words that are kind of domestic. We have foreign or domestic. Okay, if you ever take like the oath to get into the military, you say that you will defend against enemies that are foreign or domestic. Okay, so the Department of State's whole job is to deal with foreign countries and the affairs or the relationships that we have with them. Okay? So are we going to be friends or enemies? Are we going to create trade? That's what the Department of State does. Then they create the Department of War. What do we think the Department of War does? Yes.
War stuff.
War stuff. Okay. So we don't just make war. The Department of War is not coming into work every single day going, all right, who are we fighting today? All right. Their job is defending the country. All right. We did change the name of this. It's now called the Department of Defense. All right. Okay. But it is in charge of defending the country. So if we have to go to war, okay, this is who is going to advise the president. Then they create the Department of Treasury. What is Treasury? Money, treasure, all of the gold and silver that we have that backs our country. Okay? So Congress creates those 3 departments. All right? Creating these departments leads to a precedent because that's the first time that we've ever created a department. And we created the departments knowing that more departments will be created, right? Because does the Constitution tell us how many we can have? No, it just says you can create them. So here's the precedent. He works with Congress to set up those 3 departments, okay? Now it also says that George Washington is allowed to seek advice from those department heads, okay? So George Washington's walking around or sending letters to them individually. Hey, can I meet with you? Hey, can I meet with you? Hey, can I meet with you? But then if he's talking to the Department of State, then he's got to go and talk to the Department of Treasury. So it's this just big, huge telephone game that's going on. Do you guys know that game, telephone?
No. Yes.
Okay, where like you say one thing to one person and then that person says something to the next person, it goes around, and then you have to see if it's the same from when it started to when it ended. You guys ever played that game before?
Oh, yeah. I had to admit,
In kindergarten, that's a fun game.
We did it in 6th grade.
But there's a lesson behind that game. And the lesson is that is it always the same thing that's said at first that ends up at the end? Because people twist it, right? Or they mishear. That's how rumors get started, right? Somebody hears something, and then all of a sudden it goes all over the place. Okay? So Washington is fed up with this. He's like, this is crazy. So he creates what is called the president's cabinet. And it's all of the department heads all together in the same room meeting. Why do you think he calls it a cabinet?
Because he lives in a cabinet, obviously.
Because it keeps everything organized. Okay, who's got a medicine cabinet at home? Okay, what's in the medicine cabinet?
Bandages.
Okay, good. Bandages, medicine, first aid things. Okay, so you know if you go to that cabinet and you open it up, you're going to find all of the things organized to help you get better, right? Okay, so this is the president's cabinet. He knows that he can go into this room and all of his advisors and his important people are going to be there to help him answer any questions. Now, you have to have leaders of these departments. They're called department heads. Why? Because they head the department. Okay? They're real creative, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So they have department heads. However, the head of that department does have a title, and it's called a secretary, which is kind of odd because normally a secretary is not the head of something. Normally the secretary is below, right? But the heads of the Department of State is a secretary. So the leader of the Department of State is called the Secretary of State, the Secretary of War, the Secretary of Treasury. Okay? Does that make sense? Does anybody have any questions? Okay, good. All right. So we get some pretty well-known people surrounding George Washington right off the bat. Some of y'all may recognize some of these names. Our first Secretary of State was a guy by the name of John Jay. All right? John Jay. But quickly, after John Jay was put into the Secretary of State, he got another job. Okay? John Jay ends up moving to the judicial branch and becoming a secretary or a chief Supreme Court justice. He's replaced by the ever famous Thomas Jefferson.
What was that?
Okay.
What?
Yep. Thomas Jefferson is coming home. All right. If you watch Hamilton, Thomas Jefferson is coming home. Where was he at? France. Very good. Okay. He was in France. As a matter of fact, I think when he comes in on the stage in Hamilton, he's walking like this and he kicks his feet up really high. He's got purple on and lace. It's one of my favorite scenes in the movie. Okay. Jefferson comes home. He becomes Department of State. If he was in France this whole time, why do you think that's actually a good pick? The job of Secretary of State for him. What do you think, Tiana? Because what? Well, he's not from there, but he's been there. He's been over there, right? So his whole job is to create relationships with other countries. So he comes home and he's already got a great relationship with other countries. Okay? So it's a good pickup. Now, the Department of War's secretary is a guy by the name of Henry Knox. Does that sound familiar to anybody? No? Somebody has heard of his last name in First Hour from SpongeBob. Yes, okay. Has anybody ever heard of Fort Knox?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, it is. Okay. Fort Knox. Okay, some people will say things like, oh, I'm going to defend this place or I'm going to lock this down like it's Fort Knox. Okay. So Fort Knox was supposed to be the place that like all of our money was at. All right. And so do you think that we really defended that place? Do you think it was probably really hard to get into Fort Knox? Like ultimate security, right? So we named one of the most secure forts after the guy whose job it was to defend the country. See how it connects?
No.
Okay. We don't see how it connects. Okay, so Fort Knox, right? Really, really hard to get into. It's defended really, really well. So lots of people with guns that are around it. It's very hard to get into, right? So we're defending it like Fort Knox. But it's named after Henry Knox, who was our first defender of the country as a secretary for it. And then, of course, your favorite, our first Secretary of Treasury is Alexander Hamilton. Okay? So, on top of that, we also add a guy by the name of John Adams. Okay? And again, if you're fans of the Hamilton movie, you will recognize John Adams' name. I think one of my favorite parts is when the king goes, John Adams. Okay? Because John Adams is actually going to have a much more important job after George Washington leaves. Because what happens after George Washington leaves?
He becomes the president.
John Adams is going to end up becoming the president. Okay? So George Washington is our first president. We have Thomas Jefferson, Henry Knox, Alexander Hamilton, and John Adams. And these guys all put together is called a president's administration. Okay? So a school administration for our school, right, is Miss Doherty. We have Mr. Dalton. We have Miss Fritz. And then we have Miss Linda, who is our secretary, right? Okay, thank you. Go have a seat. All right. Okay. All right. Alexander Hamilton writes Federalist essays. Does anybody know how many?
Like 51.
Okay. So Alexander Hamilton was very, very important in getting the Constitution ratified. Okay. Ratified means getting it signed so that we were going to accept it. Okay. So he wrote a lot of the Federalist Papers, and he was very, very close to George Washington. Okay. He is in charge of managing the country's finances. All right. Henry Knox set up training facilities and weapon facilities. All right. So he is really taking on this whole idea of war. All right. And Jefferson is handling relationships with other countries. Does anybody have any questions about our president's cabinet or our presidential administration? Okay, fantastic. So what I'm going to have you guys do now is we're going to look at our board and our think, pair, share questions. Okay? So I want you guys to look at somebody at your table and tell them what 3 executive departments did Congress create and what did they do? And go.
I am Mr. Obey, Department of State. Well, you look like one. You're the one that's lowering your advertising.
All right. Now look at somebody at your table and tell them who was a part of George Washington's administration.
and John Adams. What do you mean? Where did you get it? They're not.
All right. So now let's take a look at our historical journal. Okay. You guys are going to be on the sheet that's going to have 3 squares. It does say section 3 up at the top, and we've got 3 squares on it. Hold on a second. Johnny, sit over here. Okay, so in your guys' journal, now. Okay, so your guiding question in your journal is going to ask you, what important precedents did George Washington create for future presidents? What you need, hon? Okay. What important precedents did George Washington create for future presidents? How do we start to answer our guiding question? How do we start our answer for our guiding questions? Donnie, you already know this. You were in here earlier. That's cheating.
No, it's not.
We restate the question. Okay, so how do we restate this question? What's going to be the best way to get your 3 points on this question? How will you start it? What you got?
Some important precedents that George Washington created with future presidents.
Exactly. Good job. Okay, so you will start this. Some of or the important precedents that George Washington created for future presidents are, and then you say what they are. Then you say why they're important. Okay, boom, 3 points on your question. Okay, at the bottom where it says answer guiding question on your journal. Okay. Now I know this looks slightly intimidating, but I promise you it's not. On this core lesson, this sheet asks, what did they do? What did they create? And why does it matter? Okay. So what did they do? Who is the they in this section, do you think? Huh? Washington. And who else? No. Who's actually creating something right now in this section? George Washington, and he partnered with something or somebody. Congress. Very good. Okay. So what did George Washington and the Congress do? You're going to put that in that box. What did they create? So what did George Washington and Congress create? And why is that important? Now, I will tell you guys this, all right? And I have said this yesterday too. If you guys get behind in your journal, it's going to be detrimental. Okay? It is looking like at this point, your journal will first be turned in on Friday of next week. Okay? Now, us doing homeroom for 2 weeks, we might be slow rolling this. We should be a little bit farther than what we are. But while I'm talking, all right, and while I'm reading or somebody else is reading, you guys can be writing on these worksheets. You do not have to just sit and listen, okay? We can work on these things at the same time, all right? Because what I'm noticing Are you writing in my book? Okay, you may be writing in that book, not writing in this book. Yeah, no, that's not your book to use, so we don't do that. Okay? All right. Yes. Yeah. I saw that last year too. As long there's no bad words on it, right? Okay. Do you have a question? You want me to come over there? Okay, I got that. All right. Does anybody else have any questions as we go forward that I could answer that somebody might need to know on here? Yes. Wait, what? Say that again. Okay. So it says, what did they do? Right? So who is they? George Washington and Congress. That's who's in our section. Okay? So that's who we're talking about. So what did they do? So what did George Washington and Congress work together to do? So you're going to write that in the box. What did they create? So what did George Washington and Congress create? You're going to write that in that box. And then why are those things important? You'll write that in that box. Now, we have a Think Like a Historian section. Remember, that is going to be something where you put on your historical shoes. We talked about walking in the shoes of the person in history. So your question is, what does Washington's presidency tell us about the role of government in a new nation? Think about being back then, okay? And you're watching Washington create these new things and move through this process. What do you think people at that time are thinking about Washington? Do you think he knows what he's doing? Do you think they are really so confident in him? Do you think, wow, look at all these great things he's creating? I want you to put shoes on and think about you being back then, watching it all happen. What do you think about the role of government in the new nation? All right.